Good morning, everyone. I think we're about ready to get started here. We'll try and keep on time. Welcome to the Legislative Issues meeting. I'm Frank Hampton. I'm the former chairman of the Salina Area Chamber of Commerce, and we appreciate your coming this morning. And let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'd first of all like to start by thanking our host. The meetings are hosted by the Chamber and they are sponsored by AT&T. I'd like to introduce Katie Copal. Katie? Did she already? There she is. Thank you, Katie, an AT&T representative, and we want to thank AT&T for sponsoring this event. Next, I would like to introduce the legislators. We will start working from the nearest right here with Senator Tom Arpke from the 24th District. Next, we have Representative Stephen Johnson from the 108th District, Representative Diana Dirks from the 71st District, and Representative J.R. Clays from the 69th District. Before we hear our opening remarks from the legislators, we are going to continue on with the format that I think we've used in the last three meetings, both this year and last year, where we ask you to write your questions on the paper provided. Don, I think there's some pads back there. That's correct, isn't it? State the name of the legislator or legislators to whom the question is directed, and then if you would hold them up, someone will bring them up to me, and we will ask your questions to the legislators. Please try to make those questions as legible as possible. I have some problems reading small print and other things, but with that, I would like to start with Senator Arpke, and we will hear opening remarks from each of our four legislators.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear? Okay. I want to also thank the Chamber and AT&T for sponsoring this. It's very important for us to come before you and let you know what's going on in Topeka. I've had a very busy session. We've had most of Ways and Means time taken up with a survey that was done across the state of the different departments, and it was to provide efficiencies across the state, and this is the second edition of the statewide efficiency review, and it runs about 300 pages. I really appreciated what they did across the state. And I think it gave us an insight into how we compare to other states. Unfortunately, when we are bringing these efficiency reviews to the different departments, there's significant pushback. And I think it kind of hinders the dialogue, and I think we should really talk about what we could do together as a partner. Most of the end of my career was doing efficiency reports and surveys of the plants I worked with, and there was always something we could work on that would drive dollars to the bottom line and either make the plant more efficient or provide a better product or maybe install something that would help that plant use less energy. So I think it's unfortunate that we haven't spent more time on dialogue on what we can do together rather than we don't like what they showed us where we could probably improve. So that's one area. Two very interesting things happened this year, which I haven't experienced in my 6 years in legislature. We had a bill presented in the Education Committee called the Jason Flatt Act. If you're not familiar with that, it's talking about teen suicides. That is a significant issue across the United States, and this would allow our school districts, with some help from a foundation called the Jason Flatt Foundation, to provide training for our teachers. And we worked out with the the different schools that they would be able to have an hour of training or two for every teacher, just to be more aware of some signs that you could look at and maybe help some of those teens get through that area. So we had 2 days of very significant testimony from proponents. There was really not any opponents to this. I was very proud when we worked that bill that we could pass it out and help us become more aware of a very significant issue with teen suicide. The other one, which was generated from citizens, was for the deaf and hard of hearing. And looking across the years, we really haven't seen an exam or an evaluation of our deaf students to see how well they're progressing through elementary, middle, and high school. And there really wasn't a way to measure that we had allowed the school for the deaf, or if the kids were in our regular schools, to be evaluated. Working with both parties, some of the professionals that help the hard of hearing and deaf with their communication skills, and with the deaf school and some of the professionals across the state, we were able to put together a consortium that agreed on how we would progress. And they're going to have a committee put together the test and report back to us in about a year where we are. So we want to make sure that those students who are deaf or hard of hearing can have that same opportunity to graduate at high school level. They were complaining that most of them couldn't communicate past the 4th grade level with speaking people. So I'm very happy to have participated in that process. And you probably heard through the media about different kinds of bills to look at what the court decision was for school finance. There were a couple different options that they gave us. One was based on a local option budget, and there was one based on capital outlay. The House chose one, we chose another, and our Senate version was Senate Bill 512, and there were some I guess, significant discussion on how each school district would be affected. One concerning fact to me that was in the 82-page court report was they had looked at no new data to come up with a decision. And I think it would have been nice if they had actually talked to some school districts. When we brought the bill forward and had discussion, there were no proponents for the bill. There were 2 neutrals, and there was 1 opponent, which was Blue Valley, and they stood to lose about $2.5 million if we did what the court asked. So we picked capital outlay and looked at how that would affect each school district. So there's about 181 school districts that would end up giving money, and there were about 101 school districts that would be gaining some money. So we have some givers and some gainers, and that was based on what the court asked us to do. So that bill is going to come to discussion on the floor. I'm sure it will be some interesting discussion, but I actually wish the court had spent more time with either the Department of Education or with the Legislative Research Department looking at how that was going to affect each school, rather than giving us one way or another to equalize the state budget across. So with that, I'll thank you again for coming, and I'll pass it on to my fellow legislator, Stephen Johnson.
Thank you, Senator. Good to be here, and thank you so much for all of you being here. Thanks to our sponsors. I want to give a special shout out to Katie. I look around and see so many leaders. I see school board leaders around, school superintendents. I see city leaders. I see county leaders, and all of you do so much to make our community work. So thank you for that. The only way that we can do it is together, but it's largely on your work. Katie really held the house together for about 2 years during my first 2 years there as the majority leader's assistant, and was one of the people we always went to. And then she did great work. I have had, on the pension issue, good colleagues to get to work with on the Senate side, And Katie took care of that for 2 years as well. And I'm really glad to have her here as a sponsor, as well as the sponsorship that she provides us through AT&T now when she's not able to be here. But thanks to all of you particularly. I could talk for way too long. So I do want to hear your issues. I'll give you a few. Yeah, you hear it a lot, don't you? The main things that I've worked on since I saw you last, we got the, just as we have all of you working on various issues, there are a number of people that have worked on pensions. So we brought the 2011 Study Commission back along with the chairman of the Board of Trustees since 2011, just to review progress. Look at our plan, say, is it working? Are there some things we think should be done differently? Where are we going from here? And let's just make sure that this train is on the right track. And generally, our consensus was that it was there. I don't have any huge things that came out. Bottom line, the biggest review from where we were in 2010 and the projections, and these are not in present value dollars. I can get it for you if you want, but the total payments between now and 2033 are just over $9 billion less while meeting the liability. So generally, they felt very good about the work that they had done. So that was, I think, the first week afterwards. We did some work on a regulation issue that'll be up tomorrow on general orders. It's not a huge deal for everybody, although if you're in an area that's regulated, which would include our cities and counties, it can be a fairly big deal. And then the largest thing that I work on and consider is the tax and budget issue. It is a challenge as we continue to look at revenue shortfalls, how we work to meet that. Senator Arpke brought up a series of great points. There are two ways that we can address it. We can look together at what we don't want to do, and we can make, there are places, I talked about it last time even, where I do see places that are efficient, opportunities for efficiency, and we can work together to find them. And the other side is revenue. And my concern on revenue has not meeting the revenue estimates. So as we had looked at the pension issue, as I look at the tax issue, what's worked, what hasn't worked, there are a variety of different opinions on that. And I don't think, I've pretty much driven everybody crazy on the tax issue, I think, in at least the House and possibly the Senate. But at this moment, I don't think there is any meaningful appetite for reform on the tax issue. I'm glad to go into that further. I certainly have ideas and continue to work on that. And we'll just have to see if a coalition forms that chooses to address that issue, or if we continue to choose to see where we can work together to find efficiencies on spending. And both sides can work, and have not been on appropriations. We did look at the efficiency study in the Pension Committee and in the Ag Budget Committee. And in those two, we did not happen to find anything significantly meaningful. We have one bill out of pensions. The amount that it could save would be in possibly the tens of thousands if it really manifests itself. But so far, that's what we had there. However, we are the smallest areas. There are so many other areas as we look at the social services budget and other general government, et cetera, where we can focus. But I'll look forward to your questions, and I thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for being here. This is one of the events that I truly look forward to, and hope that our schedules allow us all to be here. Thanks to our sponsors and Chamber and Access TV and AT&T for coordinating this. It's always a great idea for us to be here. And after we're finished with answering your questions, I always appreciate those of you who come up and talk to me, expressing your concerns and hopes that we might be able to get finished, wrap up here in the State House this year. I sat in on the Education Committee during testimony for the House on the suicide bill, Jason's bill. I tell you, there was not a dry eye in that meeting room. People coming up who had lost their child to suicide. Young lady that was the top of her class and bubbly and just marvelous young lady, described by her mom, and they brought their pictures of their children with them. And I said, that to me was one of the most emotional times in my life, to sit there and listen, because when we dairy farm south of Harrington, there was a young man going to Harrington High School, and he committed suicide, hung himself in the garage. And I know what those parents went through at that time as being part of the community. And it's a devastating blow to people. The parents blame themselves, and it's not their fault. There are always circumstances that maybe you don't even know on the outside what that child is feeling on the inside. So I think that was a very important bill to them to pass. As far as the budget, we also got a copy of the winners and losers as far as how we're going to fund the school, and that's already been covered. So I'm just not going to take up a whole lot of your time. I'm really anxious and looking forward to your questions. I really do appreciate Representative Johnson. He keeps me informed about capers, and I do have to give him a little nudge once in a while, but his information is invaluable. We all have our own expertise, and his naturally is capers, and JR has some input on appropriations, because you can't, in the short time that we're there, you simply cannot know everything, because if you don't sit on that committee, you're not working with it on a day-to-day basis. So a majority of us rely on those who are on those committees to give us the information so that we can kind of put it in the back of our mind and say, how is that going to affect our communities? So it is invaluable. I would like to take just a moment and thank each and every one of you who called, sent a card when our children were involved in the Heston shooting. It was a terrifying moment for Heinz and I. The good Lord put us in the place where we needed to be. We had just passed the exit when that happened. I had just waved at the sign because I knew our kids were working, and I always waved to say hi to them. And that just a moment after that, our oldest son gave me a call and said, Mom, I just want you to know that we're okay. And I said, what do you mean you're okay? And then he told me what was going on. I hung a Yui on the interstate and I was not doing the speed limit, by the way. I did tell a highway patrolman at the State House about that, and he said, don't worry. In fact, I got there before the city had even put the barricades up around the building and jumped out, and it was a freezing cold night that night, and the media was there, had already gotten there. We had passed the emergency vehicles coming towards us while we were just past Heston, and we thought, boy, there must be a horrible accident. Well, it wasn't, but I really appreciate the law enforcement and emergency personnel that got there so quickly, because it could have been a lot worse. But I just wanted to take a moment to appreciate your listening to me, and just to thank you. Heinz and I both thank all of you. There are some issues about star bonds. I've been receiving a letter from Trace Walker, and we might be able to touch on that. The one day, just this past week, I was so proud of the teachers. They had walked, some of them from Emporia, 3-day walk to come up to the State House, and the rotunda was full of teachers. The 3 levels all around the rotunda, the walkway, and on the floor, and they had a rally, and I was so proud of them for making that effort to get there. And then some of them came around and visited with each of us. But I'm not going to take up any more time. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. And J.R. Clays.
Thank you. Thank you to AT&T, the Salina Chamber, and everybody else for coming out here today. I'll just touch on a few things so we can get to the questions. Since we were here last, still working on the third floor city-county building issue. That's House Bill 2440 if you want to follow along on kslegislature.org. We also have a bill on the Senate side that contains essentially the provision of House Bill 2440, and that's SB 65. I testified in favor of that in committee the other day, and it did pass out favorably. I think yesterday. I think that one came out of the House yesterday. As far as star bonds, Diana touched on that. We're working on reform on the House side. That bill is HB 2625. It contains a couple of provisions that would assist in renovation of historical structures, so many of the downtown buildings here in Salina qualifying. Its Senate side companion would be SB 474 if you wanted to follow along with that one. It will probably come over to the House side. I believe it already passed the Senate. Tom nodding affirmatively, so that's correct. We're also working on university signs on I-70 and I-135 to display the logos of our universities. We have Kansas Wesleyan, KU Med, and K-State Polytechnic, and of course the name change with K-State Polytechnic requiring some sign changes. So we'll have those changed over the summer, including southbound signs on I-135 where space is tight to fit those in. But KDOT's been working with us on that so that we can get those put up and show some of our, well, I'll say Wildcat pride, but I guess if you're a big KU fan, you can be proud of them too. They'll have the Jayhawk up there on 135. And then finally, I'll just touch on this. There are several issues, but Diana touched on the Heston issue and the Kansas Highway Patrol and their ability to respond to issues like that come up. To the word that keeps coming to my mind are disasters. Things like when we had the issues with Fort Riley and someone attempting to bring a bomb on base, and any sort of mass shooting event, or even a natural disaster like a Greensburg tornado. We need to have the staffing levels available there at the Kansas Highway Patrol, and what that means is having a rank and pay plan that we implemented last year, fully funded. That started out in my committee, and it's already been having an impact on recruitment and retention. We graduated 25 Highway Patrol troopers in the class directly after graduating only 6. So we're seeing now a class that's getting put together that might be around 40 to 45 troopers already. So the impact is there. It's solving the problem. But we do need to come up with a source of funding stream for that that will work. There's been some discussion already of the efficiency study and getting some efficiencies out of that. I present on KDOT and corrections and the National Guard. I'm the chair of the Transportation and Public Safety Budget Committee, so those are the agencies that I deal with. The issues that we wrestle with on efficiencies generally come down to one very simple thing, and that is the battle between cost and service. And we tend to err on the side of service when we're looking at most of these. So there are some savings to be found. Initially, the big book that Tom has over there has about $2 billion in savings over 5 years. I don't think we'll get to that mark. It's pretty aggressive and ambitious as far as the level of service that we can continue to provide if we were to implement each of those, but they are a good starting point and a good starting point for discussion on where we can find savings and having the discussion about what services are most important to the people we serve. And then finally, just talking about the efficiency study, it does recommend a rainy day fund. I'll be presenting the bill on the House floor to start that conversation about having a rainy day fund in the state budget so that we can kind of even out the ups and downs over the course of long periods of time. Obviously, we're in a period of time now where we have budgets that are not meeting their revenue and spending. But as we have a better economy and we start to have higher revenues than we do spending, creating a fund that starts to give us the opportunity to even that out. So I'll leave it at that so we can get to the questions, but I do appreciate everyone being here. And again, thanks to AT&T and the Salina Chamber.
All right, thank you, legislators. We've got a little bit of time here, and we've got a lot of questions. So I would ask you to, if we could kind of be short, we can, in a rapid-fire manner, get through a number of questions, and many of them are written very legibly, so I'm impressed. So let's start out, and this is to all the legislators. It says expanding CanCare would provide health care to more than 100,000 Kansans. Do you support expansion? Why or why not?
I do not sit on that committee and really have to rely on the people that do. And Jim Denning in the Senate is the one that really heads that discussion up. There are some fiscal notes that come along with that. We've looked at Kansas Bridge to Health Care. And essentially when that first came out, it didn't look like it had a fiscal note, but it does. Next year in 17, it'd have a $22 million impact. And in 2018, it'd be about $44 to $45 million. That would be the area where we could expand that. I don't see where we have the funds to do that at this point. If you have suggestions where you would like to find $22 million and cut it from someone else's budget, I'd be happy to do a zero balance, not change or add any dollars. But at this point, I don't see how we could fund that.
Similarly, I'm not on the committee. In short, I would support it. I share the same concerns of cost, and I think the bridge and others in the Kansas Hospital Association was working to help us get to zero cost, or at least close. My concerns are not only this year, but down the road, how that continues to play out. So that is a concern, how the program continues to work federally as well. And so there's some risk that is there. And I know it is very hard to change course once we get on it. So I have some longer-term concerns as we do it. But as I look at where we are currently and our position relative to other states, and what I believe it would do for a number of our hospitals and the ability to provide health care, I would support the measure if I had to vote on it today on the floor.
I believe most of you know how I feel about this. I would certainly be a full supporter of it. We just need to be able to take care of those who need it. Our hospitals, some of the rural areas, they're just day-to-day basis often. One's already closed. I know there is a lot of speculation. Well, maybe it was going to close anyway. No, we have to offer health care to those to provide it. We can't have them driving miles and miles in an emergency because their local hospital closes. So if the Medicaid expansion would come to the floor, I too would be voting for it.
Good question. I don't serve on the committee either, so don't know the ins and outs of it. But cost-wise and serving on appropriations, I can tell you it's very difficult to find $250,000, let alone $22 to $45 million. So until that question can be resolved, I would be opposed to it.
All right, thank you, legislators. Let's keep the microphone down with J.R. Clays, and this is again to all of you. Do you support STAR bonds for downtown Salina?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Is that it?
Well, if you want to, J.R., I know you've done work on this, and that was it from this question, but we've got a few other ones that are in there that go to the STAR bonds. If you want to elaborate and give any update
Sure.
on top of your introductory remarks, please go ahead.
I mean, yeah, absolutely in support of what's happening downtown, and like I said, I've been working on the bill on the House side. But there are reforms that are necessary in this, and I think it's wise that as we go forward that we have reforms that create more accountability through the process. That's not because of anything that's happening in Salina, though. That's really, I mean, if you want to look at abuses of STAR bonds, you can go to 135th and Null in Johnson County and look at the Prairie Fire development. That is what I would consider an abuse of the STAR bond process. And it's an abuse not because the law is bad or poorly written. It's an abuse because someone decided to approve a project based upon numbers that were just absolutely false. The museum over there does not draw 30% of its people from outside of the state of Kansas. It does not draw 20% of its visitors from 100 miles away. I think you're lucky to get people from 159th Street up to 135th for that. But, you know, I appreciate that there's an REI in the state of Kansas. However, that's a pretty high price to pay. And then you also see down in Wichita, where the development was placed at the end of a very long street. The street was paid for with star bonds, and then you saw, I think, what we could refer to as leaching or poaching, where businesses then go in and pay the incremental cost of being along that street that was star bond developed, but are not part of that development, and they're only paying that incremental cost to attach to the water and sewer and have access to that street. So there are a few things that do need to be addressed in it, and I think are important to be addressed in it, but we're not building a strip mall out in the middle of nowhere. We're revitalizing a downtown, and that's exactly what star bonds were designed to do. So I think our project is getting caught up in the politics right now, but I think we'll come up with a resolution to that, and I can see Stephen nodding his head, so I'll let him talk too.
All right. Thank you.
I'll keep mine short and pass it on to the expert. I have been receiving several letters and emails from individuals in this regard, especially with the line item veto. This is what Trace Walker, you know, one of our true leaders in our community, it says that they have devoted the past 21 months to an effort to revitalize downtown Salina, and the collective effort resulted in the creation of a star bond district, a subsequent project plan which is currently pending before the Kansas Department of Commerce. Our plan currently is composed of $146 million in aggregate development. Of this amount, while $52 million of the project costs are eligible pursuant to the Star Bond Act, we are only requesting $21 million. There has already been approximately $400,000 to cover early legal consultant and architectural costs, or been private citizens of Salina. At this point, the private community has invested over $2 million in this effort. It would be a travesty for all of this work and concentration into revitalization of downtown. We're on the interstate. This is so important to us. Look at how Salina has changed since my husband and I met, when there was nothing south except the drive-in theater. So we have really come a long way, and it would be really a hindrance to our community if we were not able to receive the Star Bond.
Supported also, JR understates his role. Right now, the reality is everyone's looking at his committee in the House to fix it. It's become political football, and we have to get back to policy. The leaders from here in Salina have been great at communicating with us. Not only that, they have called folks. We've had meetings face-to-face with the leading senators, with the governor's office, and our people have come up to meet with us and have that discussion. I continued the discussion for quite some time yesterday with the various secretaries that are involved and interested in that from the governor's side, and each time a vote starts to come up on the Senate floor, Trace is actually usually the first to call me, and I run across there to see what happens to be going on. The current 10-point plan that got amended in is unworkable for us. I believe that everyone has a plan to fix that. I don't know how many more unworkable ideas could get presented, but I fear that there are more to make us nervous. I have a high degree of confidence that people across the spectrum understand that our project does fit with the intent, and I believe in the end we'll be able to breathe a sigh of relief when we finally adjourn and can get on with the process. But thanks to everyone who's worked on that.
Of course, this did start with the Senate Bill 161, which is a rescission bill, and we do need some reform, especially on how star bonds are oversight for them and how they're regulated. Part of the issue was once they were issued, there was no audit. So we've had our post-legislative audit to take a look into that, and they were more than happy to do that. And we know that we're probably going to need an extra person to do that over the long term. There are several star bond projects that are coming up. So part of the issue with 161, it started out as a complete ban on all star bond projects, and I raised a huge fit on that, and we got it shrunk down with an amendment just to Wyandotte County, which was a big deal for them. But if you look at some of the things that were going on with the racetrack and some hotels and Schlitterbahn and moving dollars around between star bond districts, which were not allowed, but they did anyway, so we're talking about $72 million. And then an additional $42 million was going to get transferred this fiscal year, and we put a stop to everything except for the Schlitterbahn. Those bonds had already been let. So there's no going back on that. To speak specifically to Salina, I've been aware of this project for about 21 months. When they first started talking about it, I was extremely supportive of the idea, especially looking at the main corridor of the downtown area and having some very significant things going on at each end. And for me to find out that the governor was not going to let us proceed was extremely upsetting. And that was part of the amendments that we put into 474. And of course, those were done quickly, and we understand that we have another chance with the House, thank you, to actually modify some of those good ideas that weren't able to be completed while we're doing the amendment on the floor. So at this point, working with Antonio Suave, who's our Secretary of Commerce, and the governor, who have both talked to Trace, and I've been involved in those phone conversations, it doesn't look like it's going to have any impact moving forward on the Salina Star Bond project. So that's where we are as of yesterday afternoon, about 2 p.m., and continue to make sure Salina can move forward on this important project for our city.
All right, thank you, legislators. I have got a number of questions that are on education. Some are a little bit different. I will try and summarize a few of them. We will move from Senator Arpke back the other way. But just to be general, the role that public education plays in Kansas, are we going to adequately fund education in Kansas? And furthermore, there are several questions that get into do you support Common Core, or why are you anti-Common Core? And so with those, I would ask you, and then finally there's another one that I've just received. We're giving about the adequacy of funding the school districts, and what are they going to do when the court rejects both proposals. So with that, if we can just work back the other way, starting with Senator Arpke, and if you would like to address some of those questions, that would be great.
Where to start? Well, let's talk about the courts. Unfortunately, we have had several lawsuits since we've instituted our current funding formula, and that's very disconcerting. We really need to have the ability to do a new formula. There are 42 states that have funding formulas. We're one of those. And unfortunately, when we wrote our funding formula, we didn't put a sunset in it. What would that allow us to do? It allows you to then completely review and see if you want to change something. So I don't care if we have a sunset that's 4 years or 8 years or 10 years, but the states that have done that have really been able to modify based on how they're taxing or their property taxes or how they want to fund their schools. And that was a very good idea. So if you look at Colorado and Tennessee, which are probably the latest states to revise major portions of their funding for their schools, I've looked at those, and we'd like to incorporate that. But we also need to have a kind of a timeout. And that was the intention of having this block grant, to give us a 2-year window to write a new funding formula. And I can tell you that several of us have spent a significant amount of time writing a new funding formula. We had one done last year. We had hearings on it. We had Randy Watson say this looks good. We had 10 school districts that were interested in being guinea pigs. And yes, I said guinea pigs because nothing's ever perfect, and they were willing to take a stab and see how well this works. And then we would modify that and roll it out to maybe 50 or 60 school districts. Unfortunately, the leadership of our body did not want to bring that bill to the floor. That was unfortunate. I think that would have been a good time. We spent quite a bit of time since the interim committee this summer, the Education Interim Committee. So since December, We have been writing another funding formula. It is done. It is ready to present. I don't know if leadership is going to do that. That would be entirely unfortunate. I think we really do need to show the courts that we are serious about working with schools to have a new funding formula. Randy Watson has looked at this. We have about 18 school districts that have looked at this funding formula over the interim of our session. So we have incorporated many things that they said weren't going to work and have already changed those. So we're on version 28 of the funding formula. It's a very difficult process. So in terms of the courts, guys, give us a break. I mean, when you have 5 schools file suit, maybe we should just settle for those 5 schools, but they included all the school districts. So when you do that, there are consequences, and we tried to follow exactly the 2 formulas that the court allowed us to do equalization, and we'll see how it comes out. In terms of Common Core, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about there. I don't know if you're talking about the curriculum itself, the goals of it, college and career ready. There's a lot of things that go into that. I don't particularly like the federal government telling local school boards what kind of curriculum they're supposed to use. I think they're perfectly capable of doing that. Now, if you want to pick and choose some of those, fine. But I really have a hard problem with just a few publishers across the United States providing that without much input from those local bodies. So if you're in California or Texas or Florida, you're pretty much going to dominate what curriculum gets published. I think that's covered most everything.
Yep. Stephen?
Well, I'm sitting between 2 education experts, so my short answers are yes, yes, and I don't know. So I'll try and line those up to what I think I heard the questions were. And I have to qualify the first one. Will schools be funded adequately? That's going to depend on perspective. What I know is that our superintendents and our school board leaders and our educators are solutions-oriented people. And they continue to figure out how to do a great job with what they have. It doesn't excuse us on our job. But we will have good education in Kansas from those efforts. At some point, we have to have the dialogue about what is that going to be. And the dialogue, maybe it's not been a dialogue, the discussion at least has permeated the state since I can remember in college of what we need and what is the right amount. And I don't know that we've ever been in agreement on it. So I don't necessarily have a clear promise that that solution will be found. What I would love is to have a dialogue between leaders to say, okay, realistically, here's what our revenue has to do. From that revenue, here's what we're able to work with. Here's what we can plan on so that together we can have that. Right now, it's very hard to continually to say you must do the same with less too many years in a row. So that is where I think our current issues are and where I would like to see us try to address that. So I would err on the side of I think we need to at least meet where we are and not continue to look at further cuts without coming to an agreement of saying, here is something we cannot do. We recognize that that has a negative impact on outcomes, but we can live with that overall as we go forward. So that's a huge discussion. I don't have a lot of hope that we can get there. But anyway, so I thank folks for making that work. With the current mandates and expectations, I don't think we are funding our schools adequately. So now, I'm willing to look at changing either one of those. Yes, that was a fairly clear one on Common Core. I support Common Core. Actually, I think the senator and I agree on the concept. I support it because I think our schools and our boards have worked to implement standards that work for the schools. And I think we're far enough down that road that those standards, where else do I try and come up with it? And I've heard some folks that felt they had input and other things. I support where we are with those standards. Until I know a better way to replace it, similar to the funding, I'd like to look at what the next solution is before I take the last one off the table. So I'd like to work towards that end, and I'd be open to a better standard. I just am not clear what that is. And again, we'd have to work together on that. And the I don't know is the courts. I don't know. Where is that going to prevail? Where is that going to fall out? Exactly what solution we have. So I'll hand it to somebody who knows.
Diana?
You got even, didn't you? Ironically, I sat in on education yesterday, and at the last minute, as usually how things happen, the House Bill 2292, which is the Common Core bill, was in front of the Education Committee. Not to go through everything that occurred there, of course, there was, pardon me, it's a packed room. One lady was sitting in the front row with her, looks like a basket that we used to use when we went to the grocery store, full of tiny brochures to hand out to everyone. She was restricted from doing that, however, in her thoughts of what she thought about Common Core, which were not good. I'm going to give you the bits and pieces that happened yesterday. Wrote it up here. What would be the effect and how Common Core affects our students? If we were to do away with the Common Core as we know it today, and by the way, the 2017, there are committee members, not our education committee members, but a consortium of people who are actually working on new standards and will be implemented hopefully by July of 2017. It could be longer than that but at a cost of around $8 million to come up with new standards. And where that money is going to come from, who knows? That's part of the problem, is our budget, the money that we have for our state and what it's going to cost us to implement new standards. But I'd just like to give you some highlights of some of this. How it affects Kansas students if we were not to continue using Common Core until those new standards are put together. We could lose advanced placement courses, international baccalaureate, concurrent enrollment, dual credit. All of these opportunities are aligned with the Common Core standards. Could affect a graduate's ability to be admitted to a college, university, could adversely affect scholarship awards. Knowledge and skill development as part of the Kansas College and Career Ready standards, would including such knowledge and skill development and new standards align them to Common Core. Could not enroll in end of career pathway exams that are aligned with the Common Core. Could not enroll in America's Graduates Program because of alignment to Common Core. Could not be enrolled in reading initiatives with legislative support, such as iStation and Lexia. Could not use summative, formative, diagnostic, and progress monitoring commercial assessments aligned with that. Common Core only applies to the English, language, arts, and math. House Bill 2292 applies to subject standards that were never part of Common Core. This bill goes far beyond the English, language, arts, and math. Kansas has been at the table in development of K through 12 content standards and would walk away if there was a need. An example, Kansas pulled out a Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium and chose to develop their own tests that KU monitored. Historically, Kansas has consulted national standards as well as content standards from other states when designing K through 12 standards in many subject area. It will be very difficult to write standards that are not aligned in many ways to the college and career ready standards and the Kansas retired standards. Key knowledge and skill development will be apparent in these three documents. I'm not going to go through all of my notes because I was writing very hurriedly. Next generation science standards. House Bill 2292 also defines the next generation science standards as Common Core, which they are not. Federal government tied no funding to the next generation science standards. The Center for Educational and Testing and evaluating has spent approximately $1.2 million developing a new assessment aligned to NGSS. According to House Bill 2992, those items would be scrapped. New item development would cost $500,000 per year. I have title programs, special education, testing for in 3 grades. Federal law requires testing in grades 3 through 8 and once in high school. By not meeting the minimum testing requirement, Kansas puts at risk more than $200 million in title and special education programs. So that's just the tip of the iceberg in regards to Common Core. So therefore, as you know, I do support them. And we are looking forward to the new standards, but let's not act something before we have something in place. Just like our budget, we like to spend before we have the money. They're talking about a rainy day fund. Personally, I think you have to have money to put in it first. So I think there are so many things on the plate right now that we need to address. So let's leave these things alone and get on with our business and making sure that our schools are adequately funded. That is first and foremost. Let's get that done first, and then we can delve into some of these other issues. Thank you.
JR?
HB 2713 is the House answer to the court decision, or at least was our first stab at it. It included the old equalization formula, essentially, but with additional weightings. The weightings were put in because the old formula without them was pretty dramatically awful, especially for Salina. But really what it came down to is HB 2713 isn't going anywhere. And the reason for that is that it essentially asked us to claw money out of the classroom in places like El Salina, and then send it to property tax cuts elsewhere. This really wasn't about putting more money into our schools. That is the separate question of adequacy that comes later. This one is more about, equity. That's really what it is. But it's not equity in the sense of equity of education. It's more equity of tax effort towards that education. So even if we were to have passed that and answered the court's question, which is oddly under the threat of closing schools, so it was really strange to be asked to cut classroom funding or else we'll close your school. But essentially that wasn't even going to get out of committee. So we heard it, we discussed it, and we just decided not to take a vote on it because the will of the committee was just not there to even move forward with that. So there will be a better plan that keeps dollars in the classroom while addressing some of this equity issue that the court's demanding under the threat of closing our schools.
All right, thanks, JR. Next question, we'll start down with JR. I'm going to combine a couple. Why is the legislature seemingly hell-bent on stripping local entities of authority to address their own financial and regulatory matters, combined with Republican stand for local control? What has happened? JR, do you want to start that?
Without something specific, that's really difficult to do. I know that there are some issues where having consistency across the state makes more sense, and under our authority, we might invoke that so that we don't have a hodgepodge of inconsistent laws where someone is a law-abiding citizen at one moment and then crosses a city limit sign and suddenly is a felon. So those kind of things we do tend to address, but without anything else specific to elaborate on, that's about it.
Okay, Diana?
Okay, who sat up all night and come up with this question? Would you repeat that initially?
Yeah, sure. Here we go. And if you want to be brief, that's fine. So we've got a lot of questions in the queue, and the time is
Great.
running short. The first part of it was, why is the legislature seemingly hell-bent on stripping local entities of authority to address their own financial and regulatory matters? And then we kind of go on to the local control. So,
Okay. Well, without being specific about one particular item, any time that there's something that comes to our attention that would be infringing upon local control, I'm very astute at reading that and in calling those individuals, such as our city managers and our city government, our commissioners. Those are the ones who decide what's going to be happening locally. And I think it's important that we keep in contact with them as it comes up. And if it's something that would be better for them on a more state level, we discuss that too. And I think we can pass that rhetoric between the two entities and come up with a solution.
Okay, Stephen?
Thank you. The ones that I see the most deal with taxes, and particularly property tax. There may be some issues as we relate to some of the gun regulations as well that hit a hot button for local issues. On taxes, there is I don't happen to be for it, but there is an appetite to try and control property tax as well as the other taxes that are there. So many of the things that I have seen are an attempt to hold property taxes down, as there have been attempts to hold down income tax. There's not been an attempt to hold down sales tax. So as those manifest themselves in various ways, we had a bunch of different ideas that did similar things in the last week in the tax committee again. The very most of them failed this year, thankfully. The ones that are prevailing are generally directed at the county appraisers this year. So those are the issues that we'll see coming out of at least the House committee side. I didn't happen to vote for those, but I was in the minority on the committee. We are still working on some amendments where I'm hopeful on the floor. I would agree generally. We have other people elected to make those decisions, and I think we need to stay out of them. But that's where I see the majority of them coming from. If there are some other areas that I didn't mention, if you'll mention those to me to be more aware of other places where it's happening, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Tom?
Well, I'm very thankful. I've sat on the city commission before I went to the legislature. I have a very good relationship with Jason. We probably email a couple times a month on different issues and really correspond quite a bit on those. The county, I do know several of the department chairs, and if they have an issue on how a new section of legislation affects them, like specifically for Jim DuBois in the treasurer's office, we needed to spend some funds for actually filing the things that you turn into them. So we've done that and gone more electronic. So, and those funds were put into a statute, and he wanted to make sure that the expense that he was spending met that statute specifically. And I actually had to get an attorney general opinion on that. So it took a little while, but we were able to work that out for the county to expend the funds that we had allowed them to do.
Okay, thank you. And this one will go to Senator Arpke. Just says, as a member of the Senate Education Committee, what is it about the Kansas College and Career Readiness Standards that doesn't meet students' needs? Would you like to comment on that?
We really haven't looked at that. I just think it's the overall look across the state as we're trying to get kids ready to go to our Regents universities or even the technical school. I guess my biggest concern is the amount of remedial work that we are looking at based on the SAT and ACT tests. It looks like between 25 to 30% of our students are actually college ready in all four areas that they measure. So if we're having to have them take classes over again that should have been completed in high school, that's a little discouraging. That's expensive for families and students and really delays their time to complete college and start working in the workforce.
Thank you. Stephen, I've got a question here that's addressed to all of you. It just says the Salina Journal reported this morning that we will not be raising the minimum wage. Would you support raising tipped wages since it is $2.13? Many states have done this already. Would you like to comment on that, on the minimum wage?
Tipped wages?
Tipped wages.
I'm not sure.
Does anybody want to comment on that question?
Can you get a little clarity on tipped wages?
We'll keep moving forward then. Here we go.
I can comment on the minimum wage. I understand that one.
Okay.
I didn't know tipped wages, so you'll have.
I think tipped wages are wages that servers at restaurants
Because
Okay.
it's lower because they get tips.
There. You know, I hadn't thought about tipped wages, and I'm not so I do know them what they are. So thank you for clarifying. I am not a fan of increasing the minimum wage. I think the market will help to set that over time. I don't necessarily know what that does to costs and other things, and I've not been a supporter of increasing the minimum wage. I'd absolutely be a supporter of increasing jobs. I'd love to continue to have programs, and I think to the other question of helping to support education, not only K-12, but continuing education as our system does, to help people be able to move, to provide more value, and hopefully find a way together to be able to increase the wage is what I think would be a win-win.
Would anyone else like to comment on that? If not, JR?
Sort of wrapping all of that up, and it seems to me that when I go door to door and I find that I'm talking to folks on their porches, that we have more and more people who have two jobs, not one. And they are working under 30 hours a week in each because businesses are more and more going to part-time workers to escape the regulations of Obamacare. That's having a detrimental effect on our economy, and it's pushing more adults into jobs like servers, and we're seeing this. I mean, I think the statistic I saw the other day was that back in the 1990s, we had one adult per five teenagers at a fast food restaurant, and now the shift has been to 4 adults to 1 teenager. So we're watching as our economy morphs from being one where people are working in 40-hour-a-week jobs, and those are the kind of jobs we want and we want to have in our community, that instead that adults are taking multiple jobs that are paying these kinds of wages. So I don't know that I necessarily support it, but I did just want to point out that there are some other impacts that are happening that are pushing adults into these jobs, and that's why we're seeing more and more calls for a raise in the minimum wage, because we are essentially watching a larger national economy push our adult wage earners into those types of jobs as opposed to the 40-hour work week that we're accustomed to and is our preference, and those are the jobs that we seek that Stephen was talking about.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Let's start back with JR coming this way. What is your position on raises, COLA, or otherwise for state employees and retirees?
I'm in favor of raises when we can afford them and when they address a problem, especially. So, like in the case of corrections, where we did institute a $2.45 million wage hike that was to address high turnover in the agency. And as we continue to see problems at different agencies, we'll address them as they come up. But the Kansas Highway Patrol, same deal. We had a trooper shortage. We were down under 400 troopers. Studies show we should be closer to 580. We're authorizing them for 510. So clearly over 100 troopers short. Addressing that with a rank and pay plan, like I said earlier in my opening remarks, it addressed the problem. We're seeing that problem get solved. As I said, 6 troopers graduated the academy here in Salina prior to that rank and pay plan. When it was announced, we had 25 graduate that next class, and now that it's implemented, we're seeing almost 40 troopers entering the academy. So there are areas where we can solve problems as far as just across the board wage hikes. If the dollars were there, I think it would certainly be warranted. But at this time, they just simply aren't. So we are kind of addressing the problems as they, as they start getting uglier and uglier.
Diana?
I'm going to keep it brief so we can continue on with some more questions. JR kind of covered some of it. I think realistically, you can put it pretty much in a 2-sentence word. No money. We are at a crisis situation, whether or not some in the around might say, oh, well, you know, we'll fix it. We are in a crisis situation. We have tapped about every source that we can as far as trying to balance a budget, trying to keep it straight, make our payments. And so until that time, unfortunately, the trickle-down effect is that we cannot increase pay for state employees because the money just simply isn't there. And until that has been taken care of, we're just at a stalemate at this point.
Stephen?
Thank you. And then was it a cost of living for state employees or retirees?
Yeah, it said raises, COLA, or otherwise for state employees and retirees.
So I think that my colleagues addressed the current state employees pretty fully. I can add some to retirees because I'm the one standing in the way there oftentimes. I would put our raise for retirees in the same consideration where we would look at an appropriation to actually pay for whatever we commit. There had been a history of just using using the CAPERS fund, paying an increase without changing what we put in. And I have not been for that. The history of increasing benefits without increasing contributions was problematic, and I have a concern about that. I also have a concern if we use the trust fund for the retirees. One of the key balances is the benefit is no longer as good a benefit as it was for those going forward. And our next generation of employees do not yet have a voice, but the reality is if I use the trust fund, it is through their taxes or now their benefit, which is tied to that trust fund. If I don't change funding, it happens there. So I believe it is an appropriations question for both of those, although historically it was just used as something that with some regularity was taken from the CAPERS trust fund.
Tom?
Thank you. I think that is an important question. I'm going to be retiring here maybe in the next decade or so. It's very difficult to see people that have been on a fixed income for a very long time, and I think even our federal government this year really cut down on any cost of living adjustments. And with the state in its predicament, and I agree with Diana, no money, we have to be very careful to pay for the services, especially medical areas that we're covering right now. So you have to pick and choose right now, and I choose to service families instead of a cost of living adjustment.
All right, thank you. Another question, this is for all of you. Do you support a chairperson removing, or maybe they meant a speaker removing a committee member, chairperson removing a committee member when he disagrees or votes differently with the chair? Diana Dirks, Education, and this week, 2 more removed. I guess anyone want to make any comments on some of the recent activities?
It was a House issue. So yes, I support the speaker in their right, and as a chair, I understand that I serve at the pleasure of the speaker. I don't support the way it was done. There are a lot of ways that you can address those issues if it's necessary to address. It is public enough. Bothered me a lot because, doggone it, I'd worked my tail off to have a good hearing on taxes, and that was a key story until that happened that day. And then, while I'm talking to the reporter, as soon as, understandably, one of the representatives affected walks by, our story is over. So that is the process. I do understand and respect that process and know that there will be times, and appropriate times, that someone is removed. I don't necessarily agree with all of the reasons that were here. We had a number of discussions on that issue. There was a hearing the next morning. This was a very touchy issue for the speaker. I was aware of that. We all were aware of that. There was a risk to step out on that. Even if you're right on the rules, there is a risk. I think that it went down the wrong way. So anyway.
Okay, thank you. Diana?
You should never hand me a microphone. As you know, I was one of the individuals that did not seem to meet the leadership requirements. My thoughts on that was leadership is leadership, representation is representation, and there's 2 different ways there. We are sent up there by you, our constituents, to do a job. And it not necessarily always is in favor of those who are picked to be in leadership positions. So the ones on the health committee, qualified individuals, doctor, pharmacist, nurse, were removed from a very important committee simply because of their stand on Medicaid expansion. You know how I feel about education. It's a passion with me. The kids of our state are so important to us, no matter what their age. From the time they go to preschool, kindergarten, K through 12, higher ed, taking on jobs at Polytechnic or going to school at Polytechnic here in Kansas. I am so proud of our community that we are here having advantages for our kids with our education system. And therefore, I don't always agree with leadership. When I called them and asked them why I was removed from education. Happened to be on Veterans Day. Freedom, right? I was just told it was for the betterment of the caucus, which meant I wasn't voting the way they wanted me to. So having it personally, I did visit with Representative Barker, who was removed from Rules Chair from Abilene. I did visit with Representative Rubin, who had said, I'm done, I quit, but did come back. I think after an evening of cooling off, that kind of helped situation somewhat. That was just a situation, it was a bad situation. I have to agree with Representative Johnson that not a lot was done that maybe we should have gotten done that day because of the tempers getting, but we're backed up against a wall right now. We're not getting the solution. We're not coming up with a solution as far as our monetary event here in our state. And so therefore tempers will get a little short. What did I feel about that? I just took up the gauntlet. I sat every day in education as much as I could. I kept informed, and I passed that information on to my constituents. I'm still doing my job. I'm just not sitting on the committee and making a vote. And it's very evident that those who were removed this time and last time made up a big difference when it comes to very important votes that goes the way of leadership. So hang in there, guys. We're still representing you, and we will still be there.
JR?
At the risk of showing up Monday and finding my things moved to an office in the basement, I can tell you what I would have done is probably slept on that. But you know, I understand why it was done. There was a hearing on the exact issue that was attempting to be brought up on the floor, scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning in a committee on which I serve. So I didn't see the urgency in doing it right then, though I understand the passion of the people who are attempting to do it, and in fact am a co-sponsor of the bill. But understanding procedure and the appropriate way to do things, and a vetting process. I mean, this bill, it potentially has a $100 million price tag to it. So there is a process and a vetting process for bills that we go through, and attempting to just drag this up on the floor, kind of cowboying the meeting and tossing this thing above the line was while dramatic, probably the wrong way to do things, whether you like what the result was or not. So again, man, my parking spot's gone. I probably would have just slept on that and thought about it in a little more detail, especially since it did not, in effect, end up being a successful attempt.
Okay, thank you. And this is going to have to be our last question. We'll go to all of them, start with JR, work back, and then we will have closing statements from each of the legislators. I'm going to try to combine about 4 or 5 different questions that we have here. It will be one simple question. It's just a common theme. With everyone else, I apologize. We could not get to all the questions. There was a number of very good questions, and there's just limited time. But with this, I think there's been a number of people who have asked about taxing LLCs, the policy of taxing business income, the need for revenue, and is this going to be fixed or is this going to be changed? And so I would start with JR and ask each of you to just address that overall topic.
Sure, and I think Stephen addressed this a little bit earlier, that there's not really an appetite to make that change at this stage, though there are some efforts to do that. Simply going after the business portion of it, I don't think fills the void that is going to come April 1st, though it does probably help in some regard. So I would just leave it at that. I think the governor has been pretty clear that he's not going to sign that bill, so I'm not sure what the purpose would be at this stage.
Diana?
I think the most frustrating part is that we come up with ideas and we're shot down midstream. There was a coalition put together trying to come up with a solution to our budget woes. The LLC piece, several of us were in favor of it. In visiting with those individuals, small businesses, LLCs, they are willing to pay a tax. But if you take the LLC portion and you look at some of the other ways that we could raise money, that was a key when you have 333,000 LLCs all taking advantage of it. And actually in our conversations, they are willing to pay taxes. I will pay taxes. Let's get our state rolling again. Let's do what we need to be doing. So I feel that there's still going to be efforts out there, and that certainly will be an important piece to it, and I would certainly vote for that.
Stephen?
I've dedicated most of my time since June of last year on this issue. We had a little over 20 businesses from across the state, different sizes, different industries, Garden City to Lenexa, come in and talk to us, several accountants who testified that putting the tax back on LLCs made sense. The Tax Foundation came in from Washington, D.C. on their own to testify against it. I would argue that they might be the one objective source of information. They have no skin in the game on this issue. I'd be happy to share some of their quotes, but you can read those online, and they are very pithy and well put together. The numbers, so we're 50 million short right now. That's 50 million short. Negative ending balance is not an option. I would guesstimate that we will be 150 million short by the end of the year after we get through another couple of estimates. That's out of thin air. Can't tie it to anything. I think it is as accurate as any other estimate that is out there. But further, I would expect to be a couple hundred million short next year again. So somewhere, I feel I need to come up with 400 million just to get to zero. And I'll tell you, I've got to come up with 500 million because I want at least 100 million ending balance. Now, we're all over the map on the ending balance that we want, but I need that kind of a cushion. So to JR's point, this doesn't do it. I believe the numbers from revenue underestimate. Tax Foundation says it may only stay half of what it comes to be because we estimated 180,000 businesses. We're at 330,000 businesses. They tell us we'll be over 400,000 businesses by this time next year. Their statement has been, while lower taxes absolutely are stimulative and do drive economic activity, in this case, it's driving tax avoidance rather than job creation. So that's the bottom line from them and how they analyze that for us. It is possible, based on their numbers, that does fill the gap that I just described. From the governor's numbers and revenues numbers, it's high 200 million in the first year, right at 200 million the next year. I think they're 100 million low conservatively. But to make those numbers work, we probably have to reach for something else to actually fix the issue. So is that going to a 475 rate? Is that going to a gas tax for timing? What does that look like? So far, the bill that was written was revenue neutral because it was written in November, and I lost the argument with Representative Hutton, and he reduced food sales tax with the rest of the money. That is off the table. It goes to the general fund if it goes anywhere. However, there's about 30 people right now that will vote for it in the House. There are 50-some on one side and 40-some on the other. 50-some that say this doesn't go far enough, we can't vote for this. So our question from the 30-some is what goes far enough? Just tell us what that looks like, and we'll see if we can get along with that. And then we've got 40-some that say it is working. You're not seeing the whole picture. It's ag and oil and other things that have gone down, and this is actually a stopgap in the revenue. And there are great beliefs on each of those things. So right now on the committee, I have 22, 21 on the committee, 21. We've got 3 votes. So I'd love to be more optimistic, but this will continue to be, you continue to tell us, get people from across the state to tell us what has to happen if this is the way that you want it fixed. It must be fixed. It is exceedingly tiresome to try and solve a problem where the two ends don't meet, and it is necessary that we figure out how that is going to work, because negative 50 does not work. So, sorry.
Tom?
Thanks, Stephen. Let me tell you how difficult this is. We have a legislative research staff which works their tail off to get us estimates as closely as possible. And they are very competent people. They've done this for years and years, and they've just been wrong. And that's unfortunate. But we based our decisions on the budget based on their excellent work and best guess, because that's what it is when you're that far out. So we have state general funds. That's what we get to work on. And then there's all funds, which we have to pay out dollars based in statute. We don't get to play with those unless you write some language to exempt that. So we have really 3 areas where we bring income in: fees, which would be like college tuition and your park fees. And then we have income tax, and then we have state taxes, sales taxes. So that's gas tax, that's what you pay on your utilities, some of them, the transmission fees and those types of things. When we look at the 2007 into 2008 crash of the economy into recession, I'll call it a recession, folks, I read an economist I've been reading for 25 years, and he only looks at the Midwest economy. He says we never recovered. And his name's Ernie Goss. He's a professor at Creighton University. You can subscribe to his newsletter. And for the last 14 months, the Midwest economies look like this. That's ag. That's light manufacturing. That's us. And it's very difficult to meet what the governor had proposed in his income tax reduction, which did help low-income families when we're in a shrinking economy that was based on a robust growing economy. And so have we given it a fair chance? Yeah, kind of. I mean, I wasn't expecting great results for 4 or 5 and maybe 6 years. But I think that has been pushed out significantly. So do we need to look at something else? Yeah, I think we do. And I copy what JR said. Is there appetite to do it this year? Folks, we have 1 week left. I've seen no bill. I've seen no hearings. It's not going to get looked at this year. I'm just being honest. I mean, this next week is called trade date week. It's like doing the draft for baseball and football. Here's bills. Which one do you want the most? Because there's only so much time. And if we don't have the hearing in the other part of the Capitol, that bill's dead. It's kaput. So that's where we're at. We're at trade week. And Monday, I know that we have on our general orders probably about 25, 28 bills. Will we get to all of them on Monday? Nope. Will we get to all of them on Tuesday? Nope. And so we'll try to do the best job for you based on the research that we get from our research group. And
All right.
Stephen, I don't see an end to this yet, but we'll have to get there.
All right, well, thank you. And with that, and with the fact that we're 3 minutes away from 10 o'clock, we have hit closing remarks, and we would ask them to be maybe just briefer than usual. So we'll start with you, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting us, Don, and using the building here. Katie, thank you. I'm always happy to see you at AT&T, and thank you all for participating in this.
Ditto.
Thank you so much once again. And please, afterwards, if you have questions, just come up and ask me. I would be happy to answer them. Thanks to all our sponsors.
Yep. Thanks to AT&T and the Chamber and everyone for coming out today. A real quick recap, if you were wanting to follow along with the third floor city-county building issue with concealed carry, it's SB 65 and HB 2440. If anyone was wanting to write that down. And then Star Bond reform on the House side is 2625. On the Senate side, it is SB 474. And, of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email or call. Thanks.
Thank you all for your comments. I want to remind you before we leave, the next legislative issues meeting will be held Saturday, May 21, same time and location, so you can plan your summer vacations around that. Thanks, legislators and the public, for attending, and we encourage you to keep in touch with your legislators. And finally, thank you, AT&T, for sponsoring the meeting. Thanks.